extension weed specialist at Virginia Tech, and I'm based about an hour and a half south of here in Painter. So if any of y'all knew Dr. Henry Wilson, I'm his successor there in Painter. And I cover a whole host of projects. I'm trying to be a jack of all trades, master of none. So I've got row crops and then vegetables. So this stuff dealing with dicamba is important for both sets of my growers. One from a tool standpoint and one from a not having their crop destroyed by off-target movement. But anyway, I'm going to be talking about where I see this technology fitting in this part of the world, focusing on efficacy, and then also moving into some off-target movement stuff, and then some experiences we had in Virginia from this past year, focusing on the off-target side of things as well. Michael and myself, Michael is the weed scientist in Blacksburg. We dedicated our entire winter to kind of talking about off-target movement. And this was my first slide on that presentation, and I tried to hit home the hardest. And I told my growers, if you don't take anything else home from this presentation, listen up. Before you fall asleep, hear this big point. This is from my farm in North Carolina. This is my cousin. And I told him he was going to be famous from all the slide presentations I was going to put him on. But what I basically said is before you make an application, get up on top of your sprayer, survey the landscape, see what's around you, and if you're not willing to buy what's in sight, you might want to rethink that application. And I caught a lot of flack over that. I had people call me and say, Charlie, I heard you did this at a grower meeting. I said, yeah, I know that people are listening, but I got to be able to sleep at night. And that's why I'm not blaming why we had as little injuries as we saw in Virginia, but I do think it got people to think, and it was a little bit of a scare tactic, but it got people to think about the off-target implications and being good stewards of this technology, because we knew that if we abused it, we were going to lose it. And we didn't have too many issues in Virginia. One reason is because guys probably didn't use as much of it as they had planned to use, and then also I think they were thinking about the off-target ramifications. This was the other big point. There's another platform there with 2,4-D tolerance on the enlist side. I don't know if they completely got their beans approved yet, but it will be coming shortly. There's also Roundup Ready beans still, a lot of those planted. There's Liberty Link beans. We cannot confuse the technology. We cannot put dicamba on dicamba-sensitive soybeans and expect to have a good result. You're going to be very, very, very disappointed if you confuse the technology. And I know this is cotton, but the same principle applies to soybeans. So just a little background on the platform. On the Xtend side, we have Roundup Ready 2 Xtend soybeans, what are tolerant to dicamba and glyphosate or Roundup.
Fresh water.
Folks are asking about zero tolerance, and no, there's not Liberty tolerance in the Roundup Ready 2 Xtend soybeans. They're coming down the road, but it'll probably be 2020 from what I've been told. So again, just Roundup and dicamba can be sprayed on the Roundup Ready 2 Xtend soybeans. And then we've got a bunch of different products. Well, I guess 3 main products that are labeled for use. We have Fexapan, which is the DGA salt like Extendamax with vapor grip. Then we have Ingenia, which is the BATMA salt. This is the newest low volatility formulation from BASF. EPA's kind of review of what happened in 2017. These products are now restricted use pesticides. Also, what they're going to put on the new label is required training. So before you are able to spray this stuff, you will have to be trained, and that's going to vary by state. Some states are going to let the registrant do it. Some states are going to mandate people like I do it, or the State Department of Agriculture do it. Some states
rivers, small rivers,
line training. So before legally apply this stuff in 2018, you're going to have to be trained. And right now, how the label says you're going to be trained in 2018 and every year thereafter. So we're going to have to figure out what we're going to do as far as getting folks educated. And Roundup Ready or Roundup Xtend, I can't find a label for it, so I'm saying it's still pending review. So why are we so concerned about off-target movement or drift with dicamba? Why are we so concerned? Drift is not unique to dicamba. It can happen with any pesticide. Come on, I want to answer. Damage to other crops. But we can get damage with other pesticides as well, or other herbicides. Why are we so concerned specifically about dicamba? Sensitivity. Order of magnitude more sensitive in these broadleaf crops than stuff that we're typically using. The other thing is the injury is gnarly looking. It is obvious. You see some soybeans boogered up by dicamba, and you know it. I really thought our biggest problem from an off-target standpoint was going to be people's gardens and people's rose bushes and stuff like that. I thought those were going to be the problems. They were going to call their State Department of Ag, but it was more farmer to farmer what happened in the Midwest and the Mid-South. But the drift is not unique to dicamba. It's just extreme sensitivity, especially with something like soybeans and vegetables. Doesn't take very much to cause a lot of injury. In fact, this is all the dicamba it takes to injure an acre of snap beans. You can put lima beans in there, put soybeans in there. That's to show visual injury. Less than a milliliter. I don't know if I can get that out of my 3-gallon backpack sprayer. Can y'all get it out of a 1,000-gallon John Deere 4730 or big sprayer with 1,000-gallon tank? It doesn't take very much. Now, we're not going to see
as soil pest.
but you might see visual symptomology. This is some data from my colleague in Georgia who's done a bunch of drift studies on a whole host of projects looking at simulated drift, and he basically compiled all that information to get this slide. He also did the same thing with 2,4-D, and we've got different rates. So we've got 1/75th rate in the lower category, and then the extreme category 1/800th of an X rate. So this is the rate at which they will show visual symptomology. Extreme sensitivity. Grapes, lima beans, southern pea, snaps, soybeans, sweet potatoes, tobacco will show visual symptomology at 1/800th of an X rate. Soybeans will show it even a lot lower than that from information I've seen flying around. Just to put that in comparison, we know how good Roundup, and we know it's pretty good on tomato, squash, and watermelons. They would be in this lower category for Roundup, so 1/75th X rate. Those real sensitive crops to Roundup would be in this lower category. So again, an order of magnitude more sensitive to the auxins. And it's not just dicamba 2,4-D, same thing. Be a little bit flipped. You would have cotton in this extreme category. You would throw the legumes out. But again, still some pretty significant injury at very low rates. So what are we going to consider a sensitive plant? Basically any broadleaf crop or any broadleaf plant that does not
I was familiar with years ago.
what we're going to consider sensitive. I come from North Carolina. I was very surprised they moved forward with it in a state that has been the leader in tobacco production. You do not mess around with dicamba around tobacco. And I was very surprised to see that they did do training, and they didn't have as many problems as they would have otherwise, but again, a lot of sensitivity at very low rates. I also caution my guys when they're up on top of that sprayer to
More and more dissolved salts. When I studied salinity in grad school, I had in Mexico.
I don't know what soybeans, how much an acre of soybeans is worth, but do you know tomatoes are worth $16,000 an acre? You know, watermelons $5,500. How many
Be at 4.
crops will it take to burn through?
Saline, if you were below 4, you weren't saline. But some work since then, and there's been a lot of work in the past 25 or 30 years, has shown that there are.
We burn through that insurance.
So
So again, not only think about what's there, but what value it is to your neighbor. Now, the Mid-Atlantic Weed Group, we're a really tight group, and I was excited to join them in 2015. We put out a Mid-Atlantic Field Crop Weed Guide, and we meet each year to update this guide. And I got the pleasure, because the young guys always get to do the dirty tasks of putting dicamba into our soybean chapter. And we had a big, huge discussion about this. What are we going to do? Are we going to put it in? How are we going to handle it? And this is basically the stance the weed group in the Mid-Atlantic took on this subject. We put in there, under every dicamba injury, the risk of injuring sensitive plants via off-target movement is much less when we use this product or these products pre-plant burn down or before.
It's like wheat and barley and Bermuda grass.
Versus using them before planting double crop beans or over the top for months. So there's just a lot less risk of having sensitive plants out there.
So I guess
So we have that high heat and humidity that can drive some of these problems. So again, that's kind of our stance on it here in the Mid-Atlantic. We can use this tool to our advantage. We can be good stewards of it. We can use it especially to clean up mare's tail. But again, we want to ease into this thing before we start turning it loose on everything they did in the Mid-South and having all these injured soybeans. So where do I think this technology will? Well, obviously, the companies developed it to control glyphosate-resistant weeds. Mainly Palmer pigweed and common water hemp, mare's tail, and also ragweed. There's no new chemistry coming.
They found us.
These are not new chemistries. 2,4-D and dicamba are not new. They've been around since the 40s. We just are able to use them in a different manner than we have in the past. And that's basically why they developed them, is to control these weeds. I have a lot of trouble with ragweed on the eastern shore, and I'm sure y'all do as well. There's Palmer and then the mare's tail. And you know these things are getting out of hand when they start popping up in the bed of your pickup truck. This is my pickup truck. That is not soil. That's a towel that I used to dry my dog off with. And this Roundup-resistant ragweed is popped up in the bed of my truck. I see them on bridges all the time, in the cracks of bridges. I mean, it's amazing where these weeds can survive. So the first place I think this technology will get and where we can be the best stewards of it is pre-plant burn down. And we're already using it pre-plant burn down for mare's tail. But this is a situation we're in right now. You got these plant back intervals with 2,4-D and dicamba, 2 weeks or a month ahead of time before you can plant sensitive soybeans. And then if we didn't get them in that initial burn down,
One of the options your clients have is to grow a crop that's more salt tolerant.
Knee-high mare's tail.
The other level,
We're going to cut it. And we're playing catch up all year. The PPOs don't control them in crop. We just don't have no way to get it under control. So now we've got a little bit different option now with the Xtend soybeans. We can apply these 3 products, XtendiMax or Fexapan and Injure, right up to planting. Those are the only 3 formulations that are approved for at-planting applications. So if you're using the older stuff, you still got to follow those plant-back intervals. And this is something we've not been able to do in the past, is clean up that mare's tail with dicamba right in front of the planter or right behind the planter. That is not a license to go crazy, spend all spring, playing golf and at the beach and not doing your burn down timely. I saw a lot of this in Tidewater, Virginia, and Northeast North Carolina. I'm pretty sure this fellow was probably waiting for his finances to get right before he did anything in the field. But we can't expect to plant into this, spray it with dicamba, and get good weed control. And also we can't expect to do it for too many years before we have dicamba-resistant mare's tail. So we cannot use this technology as an excuse to be lax with our burn down. We still need to be 3-4 weeks ahead of time.
It's actually saline,
mare's tail,
so what we call saline. So
to get us to planting time, and then use other chemistries when we get to planting. But again, we do have that option to clean them up in those situations where we get caught with mare's tail in front of the planter. And I know this is coming. My growers are always looking for a way to reduce cost and, reduce a trip across the field. And they're thinking about going from a pre followed by post or a burn down followed by post to a straight one-pass system where I'll go in there and I'll clean up my mare's tail. I'll get my residual out, get some Palmer that's already come up, most of the ragweed that's already come up. They're just trying to cut out,
version of clay.
the field. And that's not going to be the case. This is looking at pre followed by post versus that one-pass post system 14 days after that post application. mare's tail, palmer, and common ragweed. And then on our pre-followed by post, we had dicamba plus Roundup plus either residual, dual, or warrant. And then we followed that up with Roundup plus dicamba plus another residual in that post application. In our one pass post system, we just had one shot of Roundup, dicamba, and that residual. Do it all and cut down on one trip across the field. We'll see that we got the ragweed primarily because I didn't have a lot of ragweed in this study. It's also a weed that comes up earlier, so most of it's probably up at this time. But you'll see when we let the mare's tail go, we let the pigweed go for that 3 or 4 week interval before we put our post on. We got 100% control of all of them with the pre-followed by post. With the mare's tail and pigweed, with just a one pass system, we're around about 60% control. You could probably clean that up.
Remember what you did?
It's not saved you one trip across the field. And I'm a visual guy. I like pictures. These are those plots. 14 days after post.
The thing you did was mix.
Pre followed by post, one pass post system. Which one would you rather have? That early season weed competition probably affected yield. Not only that, it was a bear to plant into.
So
We've got to continue to preach starting off the season clean. And that's not going to change with this new
example of it.
Again, I would much rather have these than the where we had the woolly mare's tail and the pigweed coming. So we can use it late burn down if we get caught with mare's tail. It also helps on some other weeds that Roundup is weak on. You know, dicamba's not as good on cutleaf evening primrose as 2,4-D, but you know it's definitely going to be better than Roundup by itself. You're going to help with some things like vetch. So again, that'll be another fit for this technology. Again, we've still got to continue to rely on those early burn down systems because they just do a lot better job of starting that year off clean. Now, the second place I see this technology fitting into the Mid-Atlantic, and originally I had on this slide control larger weeds, but I knew my weed science colleagues would probably crucify me for that. So I changed it to more consistent post control in these marginal situations. So right now, you know, with our current systems, we're using Flexstar, Reflex, Cobra in soybeans. You know, if we catch those weeds at 4 inches or 5 inches, they're going to we're not going to be able to kill them. With these new technology with dicamba, we can, you know, have a little bit more stability in that slot from 4 to 8 inches. So not really weeds, but you know, larger weeds, and we are confident that we can control with the PPOs. Not going to be able to control the ones that are as big as this guy. He is, I think he was a munchkin in the Wizard of Oz, but he's standing on a 30-gallon Roundup drum. And I used to joke that if I could get these things to live past the killing frost, I could sell them as Christmas trees. They get so big. That would be cute in the living room, wouldn't it? So again, they'll help in these marginal situations where the weeds are a little bit too big for the PPOs or Liberty. Again, Liberty trait is not in the Roundup Ready 2 Xtend soybeans. It will be coming in the future, but you know, make sure your growers are educated on that. And I also want to hit that we're only going to use these things post if our chance of off-target movement or off-target movement is minimal. So not going to do it beside the nursery, not going to do it beside a vegetable field. So again, only those situations where we're confident we can keep it on site. This is a picture that was sent via text message to me from a consultant. The text message, he said, sprayed 2-inch ragweed with Ingenia, 12 days. And I sent back, well, you should be able to tell if it's going to die.
And it takes up a lot of space for them.
You might need I told him he might need a second application to clean it up. But the reason in here is it's for an educational purpose. You know,
dehydrate
under conditions where weeds are not growing very fast, if it's cool and wet, take a little bit.
Or soil, even where the sodium is over time.
Contact herbicide. So again, this weed is going to go down, but he was concerned it was not going to die because he went out there 12 days later and it was still living. When we get to those marginal situations, in the next slide you'll see.
Delaware and AgriLab both offer soluble salts or EC for an additional
weeds. This is looking at control of 7-inch and 20-inch ragweed by dicamba applied once versus twice, and this is 2 weeks after that second post. The red is the 7-inch ragweed, the blue is the 20-inch ragweed. And you'll notice with one application of dicamba on resistant ragweed at 7 inches, we only got about 70% control. Now we follow that up with a sequential application of dicamba 2 weeks later, and we're over 90% control, so we've cleaned it up. But you'll see on the 20-inch ragweed, it didn't matter. You know, 1 or 2 applications were only 30–40% control, so it's not going to be something that you can let them get high and go out there.
Oops, something's happening.
Thing that's out there. Not going to be that situation. Just on these marginal situations where we've not been able to get it with the PPOs, we're still probably going to need a second application to clean them up. And they saw a lot of this in the Mid-South. They were complaining that Campbell was not killing pigweed in one application. And basically, probably what was happening is they probably had some out there that were marginal size, 8 inches or so, and they just needed a second application to clean them up. And this is what we typically see with the contacts. This is Liberty. Liberty on 7, 6, 7, 8 inch weeds. Flexstar, Reflex on 6, 7, 8 inch resistant weeds, especially on Palmer. You know, we come out there 7 days after application. We think we've killed them. Come back 2 more weeks later, they've grown. Now they're 12 inches tall, and we're going to try to put them out of a contact over there, and you're just wasting your time. This is a situation where it would help to have dicamba in that system. So this is another study from one of my graduate students' project. We're looking at Palmer control by dicamba plus Flexstar when spray application is delayed. So what we did is we went out in this field, we sprayed dicamba plus Flexstar timely, so 1 inch pigweed. Then we delayed that application, that initial application, 7, 14, 21, and 28 days. So when we delayed it 7 days, the average pigweed side is 3 inches. 14 days, this is that marginal situation, 5-inch pigweed. We moved to 21 days, spray application delay, average of 16. We had some that were 28 inches. 28-day delay, we had an average size of 20-inch pigweed, and some of them were 37. So this is just a testament to how fast this thing can grow and get out of hand. When we look at one application of dicamba plus Flexstar, you know, we're 97, 98% control on the 1-inch and 3-inch pigweed. We're still over 90% control with the 5-inch pigweed, so this is a marginal situation. Still 90% control with that tank mix, so that tank mix does look well. When we move over here to the 16 and 20-inch pigweed, we're only about 60% control. So again, not going to be the silver bullet and bringing down really large weeds, but it can help in these marginal situations. Now, what we also did in this study is we followed that initial application up with a second post. So come in with a second shot of dicamba plus PPO. This shot was actually dicamba plus Cobra, because we can only put on 1 shot of Flexstar per year. And what you'll notice is that we got pretty good control of those larger pigweed. Now, again, it took 2 applications to bring them down, but this is something we have not been able to do in the past with the PPOs by themselves. So there is some synergism here with those tank mixes with those contact herbicides. And we were able to kill those 16-inch pigweed with 2 applications, but there had to be 2 of them, and they had to be spaced about 14 days apart. But again, you know, how much yield loss have we had from that early season weed competition? So still got to be timely, but again, this is an option that we haven't been able to do before. We did the same study in cotton. We don't have the yield data back for the soybeans yet. But we did the same thing in cotton with dicamba plus Liberty. That's not a legal tank mix for those of wondering. And again, put it on, round it ready to extend soybeans. But when we look at control of Palmer pigweed in cotton, this is our 0-day delay, 7, 14, 21, and 28, and then our non-treated. Even though we were able to kill that pigweed out here, man, that cotton looks pitiful. I mean, really took a huge yield hit. So again, that early season weed competition is important to be timely, even if even if we use this new technology. We've got to be timely to preserve that yield We just might have the option in those marginal situations to clean up some of these fields that we were not able to get to in a timely manner. So again, more consistent post control in marginal situations. You can use them in combination with some of these compact herbicides on soybeans, the PPOs. If you're going to use them sequentially, my advice would be to use the PPO use the PPO first when you give it the best chance of success on small weeds, and then follow that up with your Roundup plus Dicamba on the ones that maybe escape that initial application. So I would probably put the PPO first.
I couldn't believe.
But we still got to be timely. Smaller weeds are easier to control. We get more consistent control with smaller weeds. There's also some very serious resistance implications from applying these chemistries to weeds that are too big. It's essentially like using a cut rate on a small weed. And then we got to get top yield when commodity prices are where they're at, so we've got to avoid that early season weed competition. Now, if any of y'all have picked up a farm press in the past couple of months, you probably, or the past year, you've probably seen something about PPO resistance. PPO-resistant Palmer pigweed is now spread throughout the Mid-South and into the Midwest. Arkansas, Illinois, Indiana, Kentucky, Missouri, Mississippi, the one that's closest to us, North Carolina, and then Tennessee. And this is why I feel like they had a lot of trouble with Dicamba in the Mid-South, because the growers felt like they had nothing left to control Palmer pigweed, and they went out there and sprayed it. And they had a lot of problems with injuring fields, neighboring fields. So again, they felt like they had no options left. I don't want that to happen here in the Mid-Atlantic. I want us to start integrating some of this new technology with the stuff that we have that's still working, and avoid these resistant biotypes. This is the one I'm most worried about, PPO-resistant common ragweed, which they think they've got in Salisbury, and then also northeast North Carolina. I'm stationed about right here, and I'm worried that we're going to have PPO-resistant ragweed, and that's what my guys are facing more so than Palmer pigweed. So we've got to use this as a component of the entire system to preserve some of this technology. And this is where we're putting the most selection pressure on the PPO inhibitors in soybeans. A lot of times we'll use either a product that has sulfentrazone or flumioxazine in it pre-emergence, and we'll follow that up with our standard for post-emergence control in Roundup Ready soybeans, which has been Flexstar GT. That's two shots of a PPO inhibitor. A lot of selection pressure. So we're just putting a lot of selection pressure for these PPO-resistant weeds. So as far as preserving these technologies, we've got to use it as a component of the overall management system. We've got to keep using residuals, burn down, pre-emergent in our post-emergence application. We've got to integrate Dicamba with our other chemistries that are still working. We cannot go to Dicamba by itself. And the reason we cannot go to Dicamba for itself, there's an interesting study in Arkansas a couple years ago where they collected pigweed seed from a field, grew it in the greenhouse, exposed it to a cut rate of Dicamba. I think it was a 1/8x or 1/4x rate. They kept the survivors. They got the seed off the survivors. They exposed that next generation to Dicamba, and they did it again. And at the end of 3 generations, they ended up with a biotype resistant to a 1x Dicamba.
Yes, sir.
They selected for Dicamba-resistant pigweed in 3 generations. To think happen. Pressure.
I did a gypsum talk last year.
So again, it will happen. Mother Nature is working against us.
Several
It's because of those cut rates.
showed that there's a decline in what you see.
So just to drive that point home, Palmer amaranth control, this is looking at Palmer control by Roundup plus Dicamba with and without a pre. This is 14 days after post. This is just Roundup plus Dicamba post. Our pre-emergence followed by Roundup plus Dicamba was averaged over several different pre-emergence treatments, Authority products, Fierce plus Metribuzin, Valor, Residual Pro, so a bunch of different residual treatments I averaged over. And what you'll see is when we did not have a pre, we follow that up with 1 shot of Dicamba, we're only getting about 60% control. We do the pre followed by Dicamba, we're at 97% control, and it didn't really matter pre-emergent,
About 4 inches tall, but
pre-product that had some pretty
anything for
activity, and follow that up with a timely post, we're going to get 97% control. So again, this is a testament to keeping that pre in that system. And again, I like pictures. This is from those actual treatments. There at Painter. This
Did some damage.
after, so not.
And
This is the no pre with Roundup plus Dicamba. This is Fierce plus Metribuzin followed by Roundup plus Dicamba.
it's
And
to some of you.
distance is a numbers game. Which plot do y'all think we have a better
That's a lot.
than for Dicamba? That trait is naturally occurring in that population. It's not something
Long Island says if
it's doing. The other thing the herbicide is doing is placing that
you dated, it could be many.
So we got a better chance of having Dicamba in this plot or this plot. 3 versus 3,000.
Deal.
So if we're going to keep this stuff for a long time, and be good stewards of it, we're going to have to continue to use residuals. How much time we got? Okay, good. All right, so moving on from where I think the technology will fit and go into what we see in Virginia for as far as off-target movement is concerned. And this is a talk I gave at a Dicamba year-end review, kind of talking about the things that I encountered in the field when I got called to the field. And this is, what to expect when we're expecting off-target movement. The crowd kind of thought that was funny because I'm expecting my first child in February, so it kind of had a double meaning for me. But really, this is talking about diagnosing off-target movement.
Go gypsum. You got to go something soluble.
What source?
Now you
So first off, what are our sources of off-target movement?
some here,
3 big sources are,
but in addition to synthetic gypsum or mined gypsum, we also have fluke
and that's a good,
gypsum. I
The-
don't know, how the-
great job with their new formulations of reducing volatility, but, and this is something y'all need to hammer home with your growers, low volatility does not equal no volatility. And that is words right out of BASF folks that I went to a meeting in Memphis a couple weeks ago. They're preaching this as well, and I feel like they've handled it very well as trying to educate growers. But vapor drift is movement of that pesticide after it reaches the target, after it reaches the plant. So the weed, the crop canopy, the soil surface, after it reaches the target, it changes from a liquid phase to a gas phase, and then it can be moved off by the wind. Spray drift is physical movement of those spray particles before they reach the target. So before they reach the target, before they reach the crop canopy, the weed, or the ground, they're moved off-site by the wind. And then the other one, tank contamination. Getting it out of the tank, getting it out of the lines, getting it out of the inline strainers. Those are our 3 big ways this stuff is going to move. So when I'm giving advice about how to attack this, and I'm sure some of y'all will get called in to walk some of these fields, do not be afraid to walk. Don't just step 1 foot into the field and say, yep, that's Dicamba, and go home, because then it's going to fall into my lap or whoever your weed scientist's lap is to come out there and determine where it came from. We got to know where it came from. So you need to walk all sides of the field. You got to walk multiple fields and multiple farms. That's important for sprayer contamination. It can be a big key for sprayer contamination. With drift, vapor drift or spray drift, typically we have the greatest injury at the source, and it moves as we move away from the source. Typically have injury just on one side of the field, which is downwind of the source. And then kind of how I think about it as far as total area affected, spray drift and vapor drift will have, could have about the same amount of area affected, which are going to be less than sprayer contamination and off-target movement through a temperature inversion. Those are the situations where we end up with these large fields with uniform symptomology across a bunch of acres. So a lot more injury or a lot total more acreage affected with the sprayer contamination and the temperature inversions. Don't forget to look at the weeds. The weeds in the field and also the weeds on the edges, ditch banks, field edges. A lot of times the weeds can tell you, well, it's not going to tell you the rate, but it can get you close. It can tell you if there was a lot or a little bit of injury, especially if you're in a soybean field. Soybeans will show injury at very low rates. If you don't see injury on the weeds, you might say it might have been, something from a temperature inversion. If there's, weeds on the ditch bank bordering the source field that are affected, you're probably dealing with spray drift because it's a lot higher rate, and then it decreases as you move away. So that can help you hone in on where it came from. Talking about some specific situations I found myself in Virginia. Overall, I felt like our problems in Virginia, we had no official complaints to VDACs. Michael, who's my counterpart in Blacksburg, we estimated total injury in the state about 1,000 to 1,500 acres. We had 3 cases on tobacco, but the tobacco boys kept it hush, did not talk about it, because if you get dicamba injury on tobacco, the buyer is liable to not buy your entire crop. So it's not even injury, it's a residue thing. So we know we're not hearing about all these cases, but overall I felt like we had probably normal growing pains for a launch of any technology. This was a situation I went to, cotton grower, sprayed his cotton with dicamba. We had dicamba sensitive soybeans bordering the farm. And he was like, well, man, I've got injury on this one small field, but I've got, a 40-acre field that I have no injury beside. I just don't understand it. Well, the first thing that I do when I get to the field is I pull up my phone and pull up GPS, and I get a lay of the land. I figure out what point is north, and then also get a good idea about the layout of the field. Because this is typical in Virginia. We got these irregular shaped fields. You've got your bordering property with 10 different people, and he just couldn't figure out why he injured just this one small field and not this other one. Well, our prevailing wind is out of the southwest. When he was spraying bordering this field, the wind's blowing right down the road, so probably didn't have that big a problem with that off-target movement from spray drift. When he starts spraying, kind of perpendicular to the wind here, next to this little bitty soybean field, we ended up with a strip about 30 to 40 foot wide where that dicamba moved across the road. And I was pretty sure this was just spray drift, but I knew there was a yard place over here, and it had trees all around it, so I said, well, he probably is not going to physically drift dicamba through that yard and through those trees into this back corner of the field. So I walked to this back corner, and sure enough, no dicamba injury back there, so I'm pretty sure this was spray drift. Also, walked on both ditch banks and along the side of the highway. Both sides of the highway had weeds that were showing dicamba symptomology, so I knew the rate was higher than we would typically see from volatility. So I didn't think it was volatility. So again, all evidence pointed to spray drift. Now, this is, again, going to be a little bit, this is how I kind of scratch my head going into a field. With vapor drift, it's going to move further because it's vapors, but it's going to be a lot lower rate than spray drift. So you may find symptomology further away in really sensitive species like soybeans, but on tolerant species, you're probably not going to find symptomology as far. So it's kind of weird to think about, but that's kind of how I think about it in my mind, is when I'm trying to narrow down if it was physical drift or if it was vapor drift. That's the way I kind of think about it. Again, vapor drift is after it reaches the target, it volatilizes and changes from that gas to the liquid, or liquid to gas, and then moves to a sensitive crop. Now, the one weather phenomenon that got blamed a lot in the Mid-South was a temperature inversion. There was a lot of talk of this at the winter or the fall meetings I went to with BASF. They talked a lot about temperature inversions. So what is a temperature inversion? Under normal conditions, we have the sun that heats the Earth's surface and warms the air by the surface, and then when we have a little bit of wind, we get that vertical mixing with the cool air above that, and then the really cold air above that. So we have this warm air that just rises and goes straight up. When we end up with these situations where an inversion, we basically trap this warm air layer between the two cold air layers, and it creates a ceiling. So, herbicide, if it hits that ceiling, whether it's through volatility, through suspended spray droplets, however it gets to that ceiling, then it's moved off-site with these light winds. So the things to watch for an inversion is no wind. The biggie we're seeing now is clear windless nights, visible dew, low-lying fog, and then also horizontal smoke patterns. And these inversions are capable of moving pesticides very long distances, but it's still important to investigate all sides of the field. You'll walk into a field and there'll still be uniform symptomology across most of it, but it moves in a plume pattern so you can still kind of tell where it came from. This is a field that I'm going to talk about here in the next couple of slides. This is a farm in a bottom surrounded by trees, and the grower knows that he has the perfect situation for a temperature inversion. He's like, when I'm picking soybeans in the afternoon and there's no wind, man, I got to pick about 30 foot and then stop and let the dust go by me, and it just will not dissipate. He's just set up for perfect conditions for an inversion. He's right beside the river. He's got that cool water right there to influence those air currents. So again, we've got to be on the lookout for these things. This is another cotton grower spraying dicamba. When I originally walked into this field, I thought it was just spray drift again because it was worse by the road. Found a little bit on the ditch bank, but not as much. But I could walk all the way to the back of this soybean field, 1,600 feet, 3/10 of a mile, and find dicamba injury on soybeans. So that kind of threw out, it wasn't uniform enough for sprayer contamination. I really thought it was, drift, but I was like, man, that's a long ways for it to drift. And I said, I was kind of telling him, how much was the wind blowing when you were spraying? He said, oh, the wind wasn't blowing. I waited till the wind fell out late in the evening, right when the sun was going down. Perfect situation to spray this stuff. I said, actually, that's probably one of the worst case scenarios for spraying this stuff. That's the conditions we have for a temperature inversion to set in, and I think that's what got him, and I think that's why this stuff moves so far from the source. This was 1,600 feet across a 4-lane highway, so that's a pretty good ways. I was pretty sure this was a temperature inversion. Another situation where I thought was a temperature inversion, this is the same field where I got my guy with the combine with all the dust. This is the satellite image. We had about 100 acres of Xtend soybeans surrounding 30 acres of sensitive soybeans. You couldn't tell the terrain on the satellite map, so I put a topo map up. But here, this 100 acres surrounding this field is up on a hill. We got another hill on the other side. Here's our little field with 30 acres of sensitive soybeans surrounded by trees right beside the river. And again, we got uniform symptomology across the whole field. My initial thought was, oh man, he's put dicamba in his tank. I said, have you sprayed any dicamba? Guy said, no sir, son, I grow tobacco. I don't even let the stuff near my farm. So I'm pretty sure the man is not telling the field with dicamba on his soybeans. So we also know, we got a little more of the backstory, and this guy's a new farmer, and he had some other issues with off-target movement on some neighbors. So we're pretty sure that this was another situation where we have a big plume of that stuff moving through a temperature inversion. Now, last thing I'm going to talk about is sprayer contamination. I don't get called to the field with sprayer contamination. Folks do it to themselves. They know they did it. Typically, they know they did it, and they don't call me. I hear grumblings about it at winter extension meetings because all their neighbors talk about them. And it's usually right next to the road, and everybody can see it. But typically, I don't get called to the field. But this was a case where I think a custom applicator was spraying this. This is 2,4-D. This is not dicamba. But typically, with sprayer contamination, it's going to be a more defined geometrical shape. It's not going to be these weird edges like we'll see with spray drift or volatility or temperature inversions. It's going to be square or triangle shape. It's going to follow the pattern of that sprayer. Initial tanks will be worse. It'll get better as we move through different tanks and get that stuff out of the lines and get it out of the tank. And it can be tapered shape or triangle shape if it's just in the lines or the hose. The real head scratcher is, and this is something I've run into a couple of times, is I'll see pockets of it like a 5 or 6 square foot pocket of it in a field. And I'm just like, what did meteors coated with dicamba land in the field and cause these random spots of dicamba injury. What it basically is, it's probably tied up with something like Valor in the strainers. And every time a little bit of that Valor breaks loose, we get a little dicamba or 2,4-D with it, and it's causing a little small pocket in the field. But what happened here was, there's about a 10 or 20 foot swath in the middle of this field to the row injured with 2,4-D, to the row. So I'm pretty sure it's not drift. Pretty sure it came from that sprayer. And this is the layout of those fields. This is where the picture was taken. We got that 20-foot swath in here. What I think happened is we got 90% of this field sprayed. We come back, load up, and this is in the peanut growing part of the world, so I think they either grabbed 2,4-D or Butarac, thinking it was an adjuvant, and they put that in the tank because it was a high enough rate to cause significant injury across 200 acres. And then we got this really bad field right after. We moved to the next farm, 200 acres that is completely injured. This guy had to disc that cotton up, complete loss. Moved to the next farm. We've got uniform symptomology across it, but it's not very bad. And then we moved to the last farm, and there's no injury at all. So it took, I don't know how many tanks it took to get it out of the system, quite a bit, going from, probably 210 acres completely dead before we got to the end where it was okay. But again, we've got to think about all these things when we move into these fields and try to diagnose where it came from. And with that said, I got a couple minutes for questions.
We can do like one quick question if someone has a question.
Yes, sir. In the cases that I saw this past year in Virginia, the furthest in both of the cases I thought chalked up for temperature inversion, it was 0.3 of a mile. But there was no soybeans beyond that, so I don't know how far it would have went. My guys in the mid-south that have these wide open fields probably tell you further, but it's kind of hard to know where it came from. They had, cases where 5, 6, 7 different people were spraying it, and they don't really know where it came from, so they don't know the source, so they don't really know how far it moved away. But the furthest I've seen it has been about 0.3. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so
All right.
much.